Motlanthe is currently addressing that event. Let's go there now.
That special period, each year where I had to go and visit them and see to their needs and so on. And in that capacity, I worked very closely with two Cuban comrades, Dr. Pinto Ferro, as well as Brisket. And through them, when an international solidarity conference was organized, I was able to meet with Commandant Fidel Castro, and we had very brief discussions about the situation here in South Africa. And then I met him again when the Cubans had asked us to send them a bust of Oliver Tambo so that they could include it in Africa Park in Havana, where various former leaders, African leaders, have their busts there in that Africa Park. People like Modibo Keito, Eduardo Motlanthe, and so on. And so we then got that sculptured and sent it off to Cuba. And President Thabo Mbeki was on an official visit to Cuba when he was then informed that the Cubans were ready to unveil Oliver Tambo's bust there. So, as a stickler to separation of party and state, he then sent an SOS and said, look, I can't represent the ANC. This would be an ANC event. You better be on the next flight out to Cuba. So off I went. I had to drop everything and off I went. And then, of course, this bust was unveiled, and was both Commandant Fidel Castro and myself addressed people. And then President Mbeki, who at the time had an electronic letter published in what was known as ANC Today. Now, he feared that he was about to leave Cuba back to South Africa on a Thursday, but he feared that he would not make it on time, and so he pulled out of a dinner with Fidel Castro. And of course, I was there standing ready to step in. Sure. And at that dinner in Varadero, we had discussions with President Fidel Castro from about 8 into 2 o'clock the next morning. And one of the things that really struck me about him was his knowledge. I mean, he knew how many teachers of mathematics were allocated to the province of Limpopo. It was unbelievable. His attention to detail was something really very special. And one of the most difficult questions he posed to me, he wanted to know that given the traffic in South Africa, how many liters of fuel are consumed in South Africa. Now, I didn't have that kind of but I was amazed at how he approaches these issues. I mean, for instance, on another occasion, I participated in a march in Havana, and I remember there was a provincial general secretary was Robinson, and so they were to contribute, how many people would be involved in the march from the square. And he doesn't accept the number, the figure given to him. I mean, he works out by the space that will be occupied by an individual and mentally calculates it like a computer and says, no, that number is not right. So that's what really impressed me about him, that he doesn't discuss at a general level. He really drills down to the minutest detail on any issue. So that was my impression of Fidel Castro. Fortunately, one of the students that we sent to Cuba is here, President Magic. Please rise, let them see you.
Thank you, Comrade Motlanthe. So, knowledge in the service of revolution, I think that's a very important point that's emerging, and being meticulous about that. Comrade Ronnie, do you want to share your observation?
Well, a few quick things. The first time I saw Fidel, I had to share this occasion with about 500 white South Africans. The second time, I had to share Fidel with 6 members of a delegation of the Communist Party. And the third time that I want to identify, I had Fidel to myself. So, number one, I had just completed school, and I'm with my friends in a downtown cinema, Kgalema, comrade, only whites, as we know. And it's like 1958. And at that stage, as Comrade Ambassador will recall, the Americans were getting fascinated with these bearded guys in the Sierra, and they were giving some publicity. So suddenly, and Aziz will know, there was movie tone news, and they showed the bearded guys in the Sierra, and then there was a brief conversation with Fidel, and I shouted out, "Viva Fidel!" and everyone booed. I was so romantic, having studied the French Revolution. The upshot was, as a 17-year-old, I grew the Fidel beard, and I joined the movement, and everybody initially called me Castro. The second time was absolutely incredible. I kind of met Fidel a few times, shook his hand and so on. But it was with Joe Slovo, a delegation of the party, 1988, and we met with Fidel in the top floor of the defense headquarters, and there on a gigantic table was a sand map of Angola, Caprivi, Namibian border. And he gave us the most incredible briefing about Quetta Carnivale, the battle there, the outcome, and then the advance onto the borders with Namibia. It was absolutely incredible. I'll never forget, he had now stopped smoking under doctor's orders, and I'll never forget this. He was always sucking the spectacles, as happens to smokers. Whether cigars or cigarettes, you'll notice they can't really get rid of the habit, so they'll take something, pencil or something like this, and he was constantly doing that. But the third time, when I had him to myself, he was out here. I was Deputy Minister of Defence, which meant I could actually deploy the Navy. And it was quite a rocky occasion out in Table Bay, and windy, and we had to get Fidel there. So the helicopters couldn't do it, but one of our minesweepers could. And we had him on board, It was Fidel and his interpreter, some of the Navy guys, myself and my late wife Eleanor. Kathrada was on the island already waiting, and we went out there. Coming back after this wonderful tour, it was colder and rockier, and we were standing on the deck because he wanted to look at Table Bay now, you see, going into Cape Town to really see that better than when we came to Robben Island. And boat was rocking, and Fidel was a little bit frail already, he'd lost a lot of weight, and I manfully, in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution and internationalism, I was holding Fidel around so that we wouldn't both fall. And then I suggested, Comrade Commandante, El Jefe, I've got a surprise for you downstairs. And down we trooped, and I opened up the best Cape brandy. We sat down. It's not a long journey, as people know, 40 minutes. We nearly consumed, let me rather diplomatically say with the ambassador here, I'm going to say we nearly consumed the bottle. We got through half the bottle. He loved it.
Thank you, Comrade Ronnie. And Comrade Ambassador, can I ask you for your thoughts and observations on Fidel?
Well, I had the chance to meet Fidel personally on several occasions because of my work. But his impression on me, more than on those personal occasions, was as a general impression on our generation. I was born at the end of '59, almost a year after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. We are from the generation that used to be called Fidel's children, which were the first group that massively benefited from massive public education for everybody, that massively entered in secondary education, in technological schools, in university, and the generation with the greater numbers of participants in international missions, above all in Angola, as volunteers of the military reserve. And therefore we were highly influenced directly by Fidel, but also by our parents, by our families, a group of which had participated in the revolutionary struggle. But beyond that, the ones that embraced the revolution at the very beginning, which was the majority of the population, and taught us to pay attention to Fidel, to listen to Fidel, to be guided by Fidel, to have the expectation that whenever there was a problem, whenever there was a conflict, whenever we faced a dramatic, a difficult situation, and we had many, above all in the first decade of the revolution, people would wait. And the news would say, Fidel will speak tomorrow. Fidel will be at the Revolutionary Square tomorrow. And for people that was, okay, we're going to get our answer. And because of the people of Cuba were living the situation and were able to understand the challenge we're facing, the value of his words, the value of his message had an extra impact on our generation. And we're trained to follow Fidel, his leadership. A lot has to do also with not only his capacity as a leader, his capacity to mobilize, but also his personal example. He embraced the revolution, dedicated his life, not only ready to die, ready to work only at that, but dedicated totally. And if we wanted to build a society of justice for all, it had to be a society based on solidarity among our people. And that required a sacrifice by all, including, above all, the leaders of the revolution. Fidel was number one in that. And that's the influence on our generation. That's the influence of the current, and we hope the future generations of Cubans. And it's the kind of impact. Yeah, and of course we also had all these stories about his acute knowledge, his capacity, his dedication to detail. There's a story that the Colombian writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez took the habit of showing Fidel his manuscripts before publishing. And he showed him the manuscript of one which is Chronic of an Announced Death. And Fidel says, what do you think? And Fidel said, it's excellent, but there's a mistake. He said, what do you mean a mistake? Yes, because you described there this man that takes this type of rifle and makes a shot this way. That's impossible. Either you change the distance or you change the rifle. That can't happen. So he said, that's right. And Garcia Marquez makes this confession. I mean, to the point that he goes to detail. He's a man of was a man of a strong strategic view, but his strategic thinking was dependent on the dominion of command of detail.
Thank you, Comrade Carlos. So, what we're hearing in the picture emerging, our leader who's very present. He's very present in the small context, able to give strategic advice, engagement, but he's also able to communicate at a mass level. And he can translate the level of detail of his understanding of revolutionary change, revolutionary ideas in different kinds of contexts. So it's someone who can represent ideals, and particularly the ideal of emancipation. And of course, Fidel is also inseparable from Cuba, an island nation which, against great odds, is building an alternative socialist society based on values of human solidarity, dignity, equality, anti-racism, anti-sexism, and internationalism. An alternative ethic, in other words, to that of the self-interested greed and human destruction represented by capitalism. I want to ask each of you to share your thoughts on what a revolutionary Cuba under Fidel means and symbolizes to you as an alternative project of humanity. So locating Fidel in the context of a socialist Cuba and the representation of that, and the symbol of that as an alternative project of humanity, particularly now when the world finds itself in such a parlous state with the extreme right-wing Trump administration coming to power, that we're looking for symbols and alternatives. And now to just get your observation and thoughts about Cuba as an alternative project of humanity. If I can again ask Comrade Motlanthe his thoughts and observations on Cuba in that respect.
Well, you know, following the triumph of the revolution in Cuba, the first national campaign was education, and the second national campaign was education, and the third national campaign was education. And so Fidel actually made the point that you know, through ensuring that efforts to ensure that all Cubans were to become literate, he made the point that gave an example of an ex-slave, someone who had actually lived as a slave, but was illiterate. And so Fidel said it is important to ensure that that individual learns how to read and write, so that she was an old lady, she could share her own experience, lived experience as a slave for posterity, and therefore could write her own account. And that's why the Cubans have laid so much emphasis on education. And arguably today, they are among the most educated nations. And that makes them, you know, to be a cultured people. Cubans are at home anywhere and everywhere because they are able to understand why others think the way they do. I think that's a plus, and that's why you know, they are such a beacon of hope in all this misery of you know, deprivation and ignorance.
Thank you, Comrade Motlanthe. Drawing and stressing again the point of Cuban role to education in producing systems of thinking and values that allow for the new person to emerge. And of course, this was something that Commandante Che Guevara wrote about when he wrote that pamphlet, The New Person, which was a famous pamphlet. It was also circulated in our own political movement. Comrade Ronnie, can I ask you your thoughts on the symbol of Cuba at this stage?
Yes, well, you know, in terms of Fidel himself and as a product of the Cuban Revolution and the people, it symbolizes, as he symbolizes, the eternal struggle through history to put people first, to serve people, to cater to people's needs. If you have power, how you use power in the correct way, not for yourself, but for others. And you're prepared to give your life, you're prepared to sacrifice. So he's part of, and he comes to personify, but with him is this absolute pantheon of outstanding Cubans, including the internationalist Che Guevara, but so many others, and the people themselves. Because as Comrade Kgalema has said, and you see this with Fidel, and why immediately after the success of the revolution, wipe out illiteracy, and they do it in less than a year. Because unless the people have knowledge and information, can read and write, then they're not going to be empowered. And on the basis of the education, you can do so much with the masses of humanity. And there in Cuba, they begin with their own country in relation to the education, the health system, the social welfare system, the culture, the military aspect, in the sense not of dictatorship, but of using your weapons to defend the revolution, and then extend it to the brother and sisterhood of humanity in terms of the internationalism. So it's all organically part of this worldview. And in terms of this is why he is loved internationally as by his own people, and how his legacy survives and will grow greater. So just to end on this, you see, everybody now is wondering, well, what's happening? Certain opening of the doors because of the economy and trade. Is this now going to drown the consciousness of Cuban people? As we know what happens in relation to market economy. The observation that my wife Amina and I made recently in Cuba, seeing and meeting the people and talking to ordinary people, or the lift attendant, or the lady who's doing our room, and people in the countryside and so on, is the education they've received, the revolutionary awareness, is the absolute shield against the poison that capitalism uses to turn people, because we're not greedy by nature, and we're not selfish individuals by nature. And it's that revolutionary example of his life, serving humanity, that I feel is now the great shield for the Cuban people in terms of surviving what he has left behind, his legacy.
Thank you, Comrade Ronnie. Values and principles which underpin a revolutionary ethic and how they're sustained. I think that's what Cuba under Fidel has come to represent, and particularly now when values of human solidarity are being so debased. We look to Cuba to illustrate what an alternative ethic of human solidarity might be like. And Comrade Carlos, I'd like to hear your thoughts as someone who comes from Cuban revolutionary experience on what Cuba now represents in this particular time, particular period, as an example, as an illustration of an alternative, humane ethic of social existence, and what you think we can learn from that.
Let me first say that I think it is a very important question, the way you put it, because how Cuba can be interpreted, or what Cuba means, what the sense of Cuba is intimately tied to what Fidel Castro has represented, what his history has been. And we can think that Fidel will soon be, or already is, contested territory by different views or different interpretations of what he meant, what his life was about. You'll have the reactionary forces. You have imperialism, who will despise him, present him as and do already as an evil person. And even if they're not right, one could think that it's logical for them to do that, because nothing of what he did in his life, nothing of which he dedicated his energy to, was in their favor. On the contrary, they're right in identifying Fidel Castro as an adversary, because everything he did in the quest for justice was in favor of the poor, of the forgotten people, against privilege, and being ready to change, or one would say to dismantle the structures and the realities or the scenarios that promote privilege, that promote inequality. So it would be logical to think that you have that interpretation. You will also have people that view Fidel in a dogmatic way. They will look at one phrase and one sentence and try to build philosophy out of that, or use it for their own explanation. Or even people from the extreme left that at certain moments have criticized something done by Cuba, Fidel, because, and it's happened, it's not truly revolutionary, or not truly communist, or not truly Marxist. And it will happen even though Fidel couldn't be farther from dogmatic point of view from a revolution. He wasn't even a revolutionary intellectual who built his thinking, or who became a revolutionary only by reading books and sitting behind a desk. He grew as a revolutionary from a very young age in action, trying to find answers to the challenges and to the demands of the moment in a very creative way, and in a way in which he was constantly challenging and revolutionizing even the progressive thinking and even the dogmas of revolution. And of course you have the view of the revolutionaries, those of us that have the duty, who have the responsibility of making sure that he is well understood, that we take his legacy to the future, to see what we can learn from him, in the case of Cuba, to protect our revolution and to continue to promote the values, but also to try to understand how has his life, his contribution, his thinking, how can it help in other jurisdictions, in other countries, in other parts of the world. What do we learn from this individual as a leader? Because above all, Fidel as a revolutionary, he was a leader. He had remarkable, and there's a list of his personal actions, but his major contribution was his capacity to mobilize a whole nation to change the reality of Cuba, and by doing so, change the reality of Latin America and the Caribbean, change the history of Latin America and the Caribbean, what's thought to be unthinkable, which was to challenge U.S. imperialism in Latin America. He challenged it, not on his own, with leading his people in one of the smallest countries and poorest countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. He was able to challenge the possibility of a small country practicing solidarity at the other side of the ocean, in Africa, beginning by Algeria, but in greater numbers in Africa. And he did not do that on his own. He did that with the support of his people, but that showed his qualities as a leader. Kgalema was putting the example of eradicating illiteracy. That was a year, and that began a year and 3 months after the triumph of the revolution. And I think I've commented with other people. How did we did it? He mobilized, he convinced over 100,000 young people between 12 and 17 years old to abandon school, abandon comfort, abandon the city, and go to the countryside, go to the humble neighborhoods, go to the mountains, and teach each and every Cuban how to read and write. Now, in 1960, who were the Cubans that had the level of education to do that? Those were the children of the middle class in Cuba. So it shows you the power of a leader that in a year and 3 months is able to mobilize over 100,000 to abandon comfort, no school. And he didn't say, now you have to do that. His way was, what are we going to do? What are you going to do to solve illiteracy, which is a type of slavery in our country? He convened them. And that is the model that the responsibility of us Cubans, we need to keep for the future in our country. And it's the model that we don't say that it has to be followed in other places of the world, but it's the one that we can show as an example. Once Che Guevara, in a meeting in Latin America at the beginning of the revolution, he says, we're ready to do this. He said, what we're not ready to do is to apologize for our example. That we're not ready to compromise on, because it's what we're doing. And we're not going to tell somebody to do something different than what we're ready to do. And I believe that is the impact of the Cuban Revolution, which is intimately tied to the leadership of Fidel Castro.
Thank you, Comrade Carlos. And I think what you pointed to is it's so important in terms of talking about new models of social cooperation within a society that can achieve these fantastic universal social goods that Cuba has achieved. Universal healthcare system, universal education system, universal social welfare system. And it's about how citizens in a society cooperate across social strata in ways that make the public invested in these public goods. A big question for us in South African society. A big question about how our own middle class can play this more progressive role to be reinvested back into public goods like health and education. And I think the model, of course, stems from Cuba, just what the ambassador has explained here, about the possibility of youth coming from a middle class experience through embracing of a revolution ethic, new revolutionary ideas, be part of creating a new kind of society. And I think that's a very instructive lesson for us in South Africa about how do we start to create these bonds of social cooperation in ways that benefit the poor, the working class, and distribute resources in that way. And I think this is a very critical question. I just want to turn the discussion about Cuba and its relationship to South Africa. And we've mentioned a bit about some of the links, but talk specifically about Cuba's and South Africa's role and the relationship that was forged in the years of the anti-apartheid liberation struggle. And I'd first like to ask Comrade Castro's and then Comrade Motlanthe on the thoughts of this historical bond between Cuba and South Africa in the context of our liberation struggle, and why South African liberation fighters looked to Cuba for an example. Let's start with Ronnie first.
Well, we saw in Cuba a country, as already referred to, very small with meager resources, having the courage to stand up in terms of service to the people, the breaking of slavery and exploitation and oppression in their own country and in the world, basing themselves on the people, on the masses led by the working class. That understanding, and on that basis Cuba could stand up against the most powerful country in the world, not halfway around the world, but 90 miles away. And that particular aspect of revolutionaries from the time of Spartacus, to stand up for justice against slavery of whatever kind, is the essential message required in a world where people still live in bondage and are dominated and are hungry and exploited, and where you get to the point, as Rosa Luxemburg put it in 1915, it's either socialism or barbarism. That's as clear as it can be. And by good heavens, that's where we are again today. So Cuba stands that way as such an outstanding example. And there, in the direct impact on us, South Africans, not the little white guy, Ronnie Caswell, very romantic, I want to wear a beard, but the black masses of our country and the revolutionary intellectuals, as you point out, could see in Cuba, as we had seen 100 years ago, the Bolshevik Revolution and the defeat of fascism in the Second World War, that here in this period of the 60s, with guerrilla struggles taking off Vietnam, Algeria already in the 50s, Kenya, Cyprus, and Southern Africa, from Guinea-Bissau right through to our region. And who did we think of? And where did we get the needs for weapons and training? Socialist countries, countries such as Algeria as well, and little Cuba. And the extent to which we interacted with the Cubans, firstly in Angola, we called the Cubans socialism with cha-cha-cha. Whereas people always think of socialism as they think it's got to be doer, etc. In these magnificent people, the love of life, that particular aspect as well. But the training was absolutely superb. And to fast forward, this shedding of blood on African soil from Ethiopia, the Ogaden, Angola. And my favorite quote of Fidel's is, history will have to be recorded as before and after Quita Carnevale. And I was in Angola at the time, but Ambassador and I didn't meet, although we were in the same areas. But any Cuban you meet, and you talk about Angola, and with that victory, the fall of Southwest Africa to become Namibia, and the effect on South Africa. We don't realize sufficiently how the sacrifice of Cubans, in the first place, the men and women in the battlefields, but behind them, the whole island of how many? 8 million at a certain point today, is it? 11 million. You know, the other thing, I must say this, because I'm an angry bugger, as you all know, and I just says that to me all the time. What I cannot understand, Comrade Kgalema, and this is where I want to come to the will and the absolute commitment, we will do it, we can do it, we base ourselves on the people, is this point of the wiping out of illiteracy. Within a year or two of the revolution, I once said, in the company of the ambassador, it took them 1 year. Actually, as he pointed out, it took them 9 months to wipe out illiteracy. I was sitting in cabinet, Comrade Kgalema, when Kader Asmal, that lovely man, becoming education minister, said in 2000, we are going to wipe out illiteracy. That's 2000. It's already 6 years after our big change. The resources we've got compared to Cuba, right? And we're going to wipe it out in 5 years. I kept saying to him, what's happening? Can't see anything happening. To this day, what has happened? And that's the challenge for us and everybody, Comrade Kgalema, that we can have the most wonderful ideas. Unless we've got the guts and the will to implement, we will not succeed. So that's the example, including in the military field. Thank you.
Thank you. You have some observations on the inspiration that Cuba has served, particularly in terms of those who are part of the liberation movement, the liberation fighters, an example of an alternative society, and how we make sense of those lessons now that we have our democracy.
Well, the story of the Cuban Revolution is really a story of sacrifice. And they've proved over and over that there's nothing you can offer anybody unless you are prepared to sacrifice something. You will not make any progress unless you are prepared to sacrifice. And that's what the Cubans are prepared to do. I remember, I think it was Risquet, yes, saying, well, you know, if with the Cubans, if there's nothing else to eat and except a piece of stone, they will share that. They will share that piece of stone. So the spirit of solidarity and understanding that for society to make progress, essentially it means we work for each other. Wherever you are, if your attitude is that whatever you are doing, you are also doing it for others, then society stands a chance of making progress. So here, I mean, in our country, I think that's what's lacking. Many a times we're prepared to make offers of freeze without ever thinking of the importance of that even the poorest of the poor, because anyway they have to struggle and work for a morsel of bread. So because this thing of offering for free and so on only serves to freeze poverty, does not do away with poverty. Yeah, because at the same time we numb our people from rising and taking charge of their own circumstances. Whereas we all always, our mantra was the struggle is waged on behalf of the people. And we reach a point where indeed, political rights are now enshrined in the Constitution. But still, we treat the people as passive recipients of our pity. You can't mobilize and inspire people if you pity them at the same time. You've got to treat them as equals and capable human beings in order to be able to mobilize them. And I think that's what, when you go through various phases of the Cuban Revolution, I mean, the mere fact that, 82 guerrillas could travel in a yacht which comfortably was meant to carry 12 people. And there's 82 on board. And they survived the seas and walked straight into an ambush, and most of them are eliminated. But they carry on. The ones who survive carry on, and right up to the point where they triumphed. I think that's an inspiration.
Thank you. So, something that's emerging, ideas of how these bonds of human solidarity, this reciprocal relationships, are underpinned by education, a literate population that is socially engaged in the society and embrace of that as an important project of the society, and within that a revolutionary ethic that is consistently applied by revolutionary leadership despite all obstacles. So I think we've seen some ideas emerging about where, in the context of our own South African liberation struggle, that has not been able to fully be translated into some of the social goals and achievements as what our Cuban compatriots have been able to achieve. But we maybe have to rethink how we've been able to develop our own project in relation to education, in relation to the production of ideas about social change, and how this has translated into building a new kind of society on bonds of reciprocity. But I wanted to ask Comrade Carlos, what your thoughts are on South Africa as a Cuban who grew up in a society that supported the anti-apartheid struggle, and also now at the end of the tour of your duty as ambassador of Socialist Cuba to our country. What are your thoughts as a friend, as an ally, about South Africa?
It's a difficult one. On television.
What do you say?
La television here. To some extent, I shared part of my thoughts speaking to a group of people yesterday. And I was saying that at the beginning of the 90s, when socialism started to collapse all over the world and the Soviet Union was disintegrating. Several people around the world alerted us or reminded us that the Cuban Revolution already had an impact beyond its borders. That the Cuban Revolution had captivated the aspirations, the hopes, even the frustrations of many people around the world. And more or less they were telling us that it was our duty to protect our revolution not only on our own behalf, but on behalf of the many people around the world that had been captivated or mobilized by the Cuban Revolution. And in that sense, and I'm winding down my job here in South Africa, I would share that the struggle in South Africa, the one that Fidel called the most beautiful cause, in the most difficult of circumstances, in conditions that few people for a long time thought would be possible to achieve victory or to change the reality of the country in the way it was, because you were facing very powerful forces, a strong government with powerful and wealthy resources in its hands, with powerful allies in several governments around the world. It was difficult to conceive a movement that had been also scattered. You had some in jail, many in exile, you had people struggling on their own, in the struggle, in those difficult conditions, to keep a movement together, to work united with several organizations, the ANC, the South African Communist Party, the labor movement, several civil organizations in the country. And to be able through that, not only to achieve victory, but to mobilize the sympathy and the solidarity worldwide, was a great contribution to humankind. And that contribution to humankind, to some extent, makes the rest of the world expect you to protect what you achieved. To protect what you were able to do at great sacrifice to yourselves, a great sacrifice to your people, and not lose what you have. Because we're speaking of Fidel. I once read the letters he wrote when he was in jail. He was in prison after the Moncada attack. He was in prison. And in one of and we all know that Fidel was a great student of José Martí. José Martí was a national hero, apostle of Cuban liberation, is the main, we would say, teacher and icon and guide for Fidel Castro. And in one of those letters, Fidel, writing very young, still in prison, but with revolution in his mind, he writes to this comrades of his, everything I've read of José Martí and about José Martí, his great contribution as a revolutionary leader, as a journalist, as a poet, as a professor, as a writer, as an intellectual, the one that impresses me the most was his capacity to unite all Cubans in one cause. The people that had struggled in the 10-year war, the younger generation, the tobacco rollers who were in Tampa and Key West in the United States, and to unite them all in one cause, in one struggle. And to a great extent, the strength of the Cuban Revolution and our capacity not only to survive but to build a new society is keeping the unity among our people and the unity of the revolutionary forces. And again, winding down in South Africa, that is the message I convey to my friends, to my comrades here in this country.
Thank you.
Well, those there were the live pictures from Liliesleaf in Rivonia in the north of Johannesburg on the commemoration of Fidel Castro and of Cuba's role in the liberation struggle. And of course, that live discussion attended by, among others, former President Kgalema Motlanthe and struggle stalwart Ronnie Castro. Right now, let's take you live to the